learning coming in all the time. Right now he's at Axis, working as a specialist learning consultant.
Solution knowledge specialist, to be
Solution
exact.
knowledge
I don't know what it means, but
specialist.
that's
Okay,
my
thank
title.
you. Yes. Please welcome Göran Bolinder. Thank you.
Thank you. One morning back in the mid-80s, I stood in a classroom in front of 20 young military recruits. In the army, a morning is something that happens soon after midnight. So my soldiers would rather be sleeping than listening to me, and I would be lying if I said they were trembling from excitement of learning something. But my task was to learn them how to use an auto-injector. An auto-injector is something every soldier in Sweden had in their equipment during the Cold War to protect them from nerve gas attacks. If you were exposed to gas, you had a few seconds to dig it out from your uniform. Remove the safety clip, hold it against your leg, won't do that, and then press the back end of the injector. And it has a long, fat, spring-loaded needle in the top that injects an antidote. And the reaction back then was about the same as you had today. Someone got wet. The back end of the classroom, it was a bigger room back then, the back end of the classroom got wet. So if their focus wasn't at 100% when I started my lesson, I now had 20 young men staring at me, gasping. But without paying any attention to what just happened or to the wet wall behind them, I just continued saying, now it's your time to try. You each have an auto-injector in front of you. Pick it up and hold it against your leg. If you listen carefully and follow my instructions, no one will get hurt. The injectors I handed out were dummies without needles, but I didn't tell them that yet. Needless to say, at this point, I'd gained their full attention, and the rest of the lesson was a walk in the park without anyone falling asleep. Do you like needles? No, most people don't. Especially not the sensational surprise of having one inserted in your body by mistake, just because you didn't pay attention. Using needles and threats of injury for increasing motivation might be effective, but it's probably not a good idea if you want to keep your job and stay out of prison. Unless you're training fakirs, of course. So instead, I would like to discuss some other approaches on how to increase motivation. And I've covered both some strategic long-term methods and some more technical, tactical, short-time techniques. When we talk about motivation connected to learning, we normally refer to what people desire, what they choose to do, and what they commit to do. Motivation explains what goals people choose to pursue and how actively or intensely they pursue them. And we can divide motivation into two different types, known as intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic or internal motivation comes from within the individual, and it's a self-desire to gain knowledge. And people with intrinsic motivation, they engage in tasks for the pleasure that comes from the task itself. Extrinsic or external motivation, on the other hand, makes people engage in tasks for the rewards they get from completing them, and not from the tasks themselves. You might, for instance, be forced to take a course to get your exam, to be promoted, or to raise your salary. And in this context, a reward can also be to avoid punishment caused by not completing a task. Intrinsic motivation can be long-lasting and self-sustaining, but it usually takes time to affect behavior. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, makes it easier to quickly motivate people and get them to work towards a goal. But the motivation will only last as long as the external rewards are satisfying enough. In a teaching situation, you should, of course, always aim for intrinsic motivation. I heard you were thinking it, at least. Most corporate learning activities today are initiated by the need for change. It could be a new computer system being implemented, a new security policy, change parking lot regulations, or basically anything. How many of you have taken part in training like this? Hands up. Yeah, been there many times as well. And we all know that change is constant, so that means there will be a never-ending demand for workforce training. And these courses are important steps in the change process. So you might think that some effort is made to make sure they are well received by the workforce. Well, most of the time, this is what we get. You got mail. New mandatory e-learning on the security policy. Please finalize before Friday. Does anyone here have children? Then you probably know how well it works when you try to control things. Control your kids with things like, you must go to bed, or you can't have a pudding if you don't eat your meat. It's the same with adults, but worse, since we are much more creative and come up with excuses. As a manager, you may understand the importance of the course and how it fits in your big strategic organizational change process, but your employees don't. And that's why you have to prepare them with some change management techniques. And there are many models for change, and one of the most popular is the Kübler-Ross change curve, originally presented as the 5 stages of grief. When it was published in 1969, it was a model consisting of the different stages of emotions experienced by a person who is soon going to die. And those were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Let me give you an example to illustrate this model. Imagine one of the chilly winter mornings soon to come here in Sweden. It's dark, and there's a thin layer of frost on the ground. I'm late for work and have to rush to my car parked outside. And when I turn the ignition key, nothing happens. And I realize the battery is dead. What I then experience is a demonstration of the different stages in the model. My first reaction is shock and denial. What? I can't believe this is happening to me now, when I'm already running late. I try to start the car again and again and again, but no use. Then anger and frustration follows. I realize the car can't be started and begin to feel angry and frustrated. Words my mother didn't teach me starts coming out of my mouth. Even though I know it won't help, I then start bargaining, asking the car to start, please, just for once. I promise I will keep it maintained and get the battery changed as soon as possible. I might even promise to wash it by hand. But after that, I reach depression. Negative thoughts start rushing through my mind, and I begin to feel depressed, sad, and miserable. I fear my job will be taken away, and I see no way out of the situation. Everything is hopeless. But then, after a while, I reach acceptance. I finally start to get hold of the situation and begin to figure out what to do next. I might check a schedule for public transportation or consider grabbing a cab and decide to deal with the dead battery situation later. After the first release, this model has been found to be valid also in many other cases, for example, connected to change. And the change edition of the Kübler-Ross model uses a bit different naming, as you can see here. And in the business context, this emotional roller coaster could be caused, for example, by the implementation of a new computer system. No, I don't have time to learn a new system again. I'll stick to the old one. It works fine for me. Besides, I spent a lot of time building templates, and I know all the keyboard shortcuts by heart. You know the feeling? Well, regardless of your opinion, change will happen. The new system will be implemented, but don't you worry. The almighty management has secured that extensive training is part of the package to quickly get everyone up and running. Right. Looking at the model, where do you think we find the precious learning package? It usually hits us here, starting when people are feeling really miserable. So it's no wonder it can be hard to find motivated learners. But lucky us, in change management, there are ways to flatten out the curve. And the first step is to create awareness that the change is coming. And this must happen here, while we're still on or above status quo. This is when reality of the change hits, and people may be in shock or denial. Here people need information to understand what's happening. So communicate often, but don't give too much information at a time. Instead, make sure people know where to find more if they want. When we have lit a spark of curiosity in our frustrated users, we need to intensify communication to create interest in the coming change, and hopefully a desire to learn. Here people start to react by feeling concern, anger, or fear, and they may resist the change actively or passively. And this is a critical stage in the change process for the organization, so it needs planning and preparation. You need to carefully consider the impacts and objections people may have and address them with clear communication. Your objective during this stage is to turn frustration, fear, and anger into a slow-growing interest. The third stage, depression, is the turning point in the change process. Here it's important to encourage people to start testing and exploring what the change actually means for them. And this is time to focus on increasing motivation. And since this stage is where learning starts normally, you should use motivational design to help create learning that's appealing to people. And in the end, we'll get them well trained. But more about that later. The learning phase can be difficult for many employees. Most now start to realize that there's no way out of this. And it's important to understand that people handle change and learning something new in very different ways. So the more exciting the training can be made, the better your chances are to get people well trained and move along in the process. And during the learning phase, it's important to provide plenty of support to remove anything that could prevent learning. Then we can reach the goal we have been aiming for. People finally begin to embrace the change and accept the situation. And they understand the importance of the change and they resign towards it. And to reinforce this effect, you should provide plenty of support and different means of knowledge sharing here. For example, use online communities, user groups, super user support, and so on. This will help people who are lagging a bit behind to catch up faster and get everyone on board. If we manage to handle the change process like this, magic will happen. As you can see, the change curve is now kept closer to the status quo line. And this means that people will be happier and more productive during the change. And the best part, since we're talking learning, look what's happened with the learning block. Isn't that beautiful? A couple of years ago, I was part of a project where we used this setup in close cooperation between the communication and the learning teams. The customer was a global corporation that was implementing a new business system that would affect a couple of thousand users. And to give you an idea of the time frame, our first awareness initiatives were launched about half a year before the training was planned to start. Some of these initiatives were brief notes on the internet, some presence by project members at team meetings, and a short video teaser. And this is a teaser we showed them to start create interest.
Ling from Purchase Development here. You know what? We've got something great cooking. I can't wait until February to show you more. So stay tuned.
Maybe not the kind of communication you would expect about a new computer system. The guy Henrik at the end was a very busy man, by the way. So our communications manager had to hunt him down between two meetings and more or less push him up against the wall to film me with her mobile phone. SSCM stands for Supplier, Sourcing and Contract Management. But we don't mention that in the video to keep an element of mystery. To help getting better results in the change process, one of the most effective ways is to identify early adopters and use them as ambassadors to convince the rest of the organization. And this graph is called the diffusion of innovation. It's a theory that explains how, why, and at what rate new ideas and technologies are spread. So on the left end of the curve, we find the people who always turn up with the newest high-tech gizmos we didn't even know existed. And over there at the right end, we find our parents. So how do we find our early adopters then? Well, the people we are looking for are often formal or informal leaders whose opinions are well respected within an organization. They are the people who give relevant feedback to our first awareness posts on the intranet. You will find them lists on people volunteering to be functional experts. If you are super users for other applications, you can probably reuse the same people. And once identified, make sure to give them lots of love. Ask them for input, invite them to early user tests, let them do beta testing, give them t-shirts, whatever makes them happy. Be creative. And properly treated, the early adopters will then spread the word among their colleagues in the organization. They will have to create awareness and build curiosity among the people on the right half of the diagram. And you will meet less resistance when training is launched. Let's go back to the project and my customer. I can't tell you the name, but it's a large company in the furniture and meatball business. About 3 months after the trailer, we released the next video with some more information about the project. Still a bit mysterious to keep up interest and curiosity. At the same time, the articles on the internet became longer and more frequent, and people started to turn up more often on team meetings to inform about what was happening. This is video number 2.
Hey, this is Henrik Gunnerling from Purchase Development. Now it's time to find out more about SSCM. It will be an important tool for you and your suppliers to work together more easily. So let's find out how.
This is Victor. He works at purchasing and, like many of us, often struggles with his daily work. Mapping new suppliers, leading sourcing events, and searching for information in different places. Victor, you need SSCM. SSCM brings supplier information, sourcing, price management, and contract management into one solution. Today, your everyday work is a bit like a busy kitchen with too many pots on the boil. You have to juggle between different IT tools to view your supplier status, track supplier history, and approve contracts. Isn't that right, Victor? SSCM lets you focus on one solution, one hearty soup, and a single source of truth for your valuable data. And you know the days when you are so up for the game, all prepared and ready to go. But today, with purchasing and suppliers communicating via different systems, the information flow is slow and you are left waiting. SSCM improves the way purchasing co-workers and suppliers collaborate, speeding up processes and giving you the insights you need to take the right action at the right time. Today, with information scattered over different systems, there is a higher risk of losing valuable data. Those days are over. Using cloud technology, SSCM keeps your information safe. Stay cool, it's in the tool. In the fast-moving purchasing world, we need tools that can be quickly and easily adapted to the business needs. SSCM is a flexible, module-based solution that's quick and easy to adapt. It's a tool for growth, keeping us ahead of the game. SSCM, because great people deserve great tools.
Did you notice at the beginning that even Henrik now realized the importance of communication and committed to be filmed in a real studio? I left the project just before training of super users started, but I've heard from my colleagues that users were very curious and eager to get their hands on the new system. So communication is obviously important to build awareness and to reduce the negative effects of change. I talk a lot about learning today. Maybe not a surprise given the title of the session or this group's theme. But what you might not realize is that many of our common day-to-day meeting presentations also can be seen as a kind of learning. So many of the techniques we discuss here tonight will be applicable there as well. If you have done everything right so far. You know how well-prepared users who can't wait to start taking the legendary course they've heard so much about. Don't ruin it with a bad learning experience. Learning developers are generally quite good at instructional design. Most of us can define learning objectives that are relevant and build courses or lectures that use different pedagogical methods to guide the students towards the goals. We have several instructional design models to help us, but these models do not normally address motivation. And that's why we have to work with motivational design in parallel with instructional design. This law, first published in 1908, dictates that performance increases with arousal, but only up to a certain point. When the level of arousal becomes too high, performance decreases. And this means that using entertainment in a wrong way and too frequently can actually have a negative effect on our students' motivation to learn, since they begin to work only for the extrinsic rewards. Too much bells and whistles will make our learners behave like squirrels in a nut factory, and we don't want that, believe me. One common mistake people make is not to adapt the amount of stimulation to the student's level of motivation. You should never try to motivate a student that's already motivated. So motivational design can be seen as the art of making learning appealing without becoming too entertaining. These are the gap slides. There's lots of gaps. Successful learning designers consider motivation gaps. They identify the gaps in learners' motivation and then strive to close those gaps with their design. And motivational design is about identifying motivational objectives and then addressing them to get changes in motivation. And when identifying motivational objectives, there is an important distinction between closing a motivational gap and keep up and maintain motivation. In some settings, there will be a specific motivational gap that needs attention. For example, if your audience is not likely to see the relevance of a given topic, then you have a motivational gap and may need a motivational objective that takes care of that problem. In other situations, there are no major motivational problems identified, but it's still necessary to maintain motivation during the training. So this means you will have to include motivational tactics to avoid that your students are getting bored. And to be effective, your motivational tactics must support your instructional goals. Sometimes the motivational features can be fun or even entertaining, but if they don't engage the learner in the instructional purpose of the course, it will not promote learning. Like with instructional design, there are models to help us with motivational design. And the best known is probably the ARCS model for motivational design, introduced by John Keller in 1979. This book was released in 2010, and it contains everything you wanted to know about the ARCS model, but were too afraid to ask. So if you're serious about motivational design, and you should be, so read it. It has plenty of real-world examples and ready-to-use worksheets. So motivational design is a very powerful aid for helping you as a learning designer to create courses that will keep up learner engagement. The ARCS model contains 4 elements of motivation, and the acronym stands for attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. And you can use these elements in several ways. For example, gamification of learning content uses some of the ARCS principles, such as offering challenges, providing feedback, and giving ways to level up. Learner-centered design approaches also follow some of the ARCS principles by offering learners multiple ways for consuming learning and giving them control over some aspects of their learning. But to successfully implement or apply the ARCS model, you must first analyze the target audience. So know who are the learners, what are their goals, what gets them going, what could stop them from learning, and so on. And when you know your learners, you can identify gaps in motivation and find out in which of the 4 areas you need to put your efforts. So let's take a closer look at these elements. In many cases, a course is a result of goals and learning objectives that are defined by managers or forced by law or other regulations. That means that the learners might lack intrinsic motivation to take the course, so engaging them can be a challenge. Some examples of course designers can engage these learners can be to create a learning game or by pulling them into a story. Elements of surprise are always effective. And by active participation, these learners can get more engaged in the learning process, and that makes them more likely to be interested in the content. Humor should be used with caution, but some light-hearted fun elements can help you to get attention of the learners. Another technique to grab the attention is to present statements or facts that may be in conflict with what the learner already knows or believes to be true. Then always presenting information in the same way is also boring. So grab attention by using a variety of different media. And then learners get more motivated if they believe that there is a practical application in real life of what they learn. So using real-world examples will grab their attention and make them want to know more. If the motivational gaps come from a lack of interest or from not buying the goals, you might need to concentrate your motivational tactics on showing relevance. How will the new information or skill help your learners to solve a familiar problem or to make their lives easier? A relevance-based motivational gap can be caused by lack of understanding the bigger picture. And this means that you might need to show how the skill has been applied by others in the organization, or to convince learners that this knowledge will be useful in the future. A very powerful motivational strategy is to let learners establish links between new information presented and what they already know from previous experiences. If they believe that learning is successful and not a waste of time, it will keep them engaged in the course. Adult learners usually attend the course when they actually need it, or when someone else, like their manager, says they need it. So if they can see a direct connection between the course they attend and how it will give them present worth with new skills, motivation will increase. Also, how learners believe the course will help them in the future is important. So that should be communicated from the beginning. Presenting role models of other people who successfully apply the particular piece of knowledge or skill presented will also motivate learners to find the course useful. And finally, giving them different choices is another factor that increases motivation. Adult learners often know exactly what they want to learn, so they have preferences on specific learning methods or media that they like. So if possible, let them choose. It's important that your learners feel confident and that they can apply what they learn after the course. So set expectation by presenting clear goals and provide guidance that helps them to progress and reach the goals without being overwhelmed. If too much complex information is thrown at poorly prepared learners, the result will be learners who are convinced that they will never be able to do whatever is being taught. So encourage learners to take small steps and show them the progress after each step, because this will help them to believe in themselves, and that increases motivation. By communicating objectives and prerequisites, learners will know in advance what they have to achieve. And to realize that they can reach the goals of a course is another motivating factor. So it's important for them to know how they will be evaluated after the course. Providing feedback is, of course, important for learner motivation. Without feedback, they feel confused because they can't be sure of their progress and if they're actually learning something. And to let learners have some degree of control over the learning process also gives them a sense that they have control over the learning. Because many of these categories flow together a bit. Finally, satisfaction. And learners gain satisfaction when they can apply their new skills, solve problems, and earn feedback, praise, and rewards that are meaningful to them. And these rewards can be anything in range between a sense of accomplishment, of earning a badge or a certificate, to getting a reinforcement from management or a bonus. And this increases the level of satisfaction from the course, because they will live with a feeling of achievement and recognition of their efforts. And remember, it doesn't have to be physical rewards. If we have managed to increase the learner's intrinsic motivation, passing the course and learning something new might be sufficient as a reward. And maybe most important, again, learner satisfaction comes from meaningful achievements. So be sure to provide learners with plenty of opportunities to use their new skills in real life as soon as possible. By this, I will get inner satisfaction, as they will find worthwhile the time, money, and effort they put into the learning activity. And of course, avoid negative influences and focus on the positive outcomes. To help you with your motivational design, you can use checklists when designing the course. And this is a short version of one of the checklists from John Keller's book. But to get full effect, you need to do your homework and find your learners' motivational gaps before you start ticking the boxes. And for each one of these questions, there are a number of sub-questions that will help you find out if you have covered all aspects from the ARCS model. As an example, here's the level of details for one of these sub-questions. And you don't have to use them all, of course. What you need depends on the outcome from your motivational gap analysis. You might, for example, have found out that confidence and relevance are okay for the target group, while attention and satisfaction need some extra care. So pick the questions that are applicable for each situation. The complete checklists contain 73 sub-questions in total, and you can find them in the PDF for my presentations. I'll give you the link at the end. So, let's return to my sleepy soldiers. My little stunt with auto-injector surely made them pay attention to me. But the truth is, they were already highly motivated. Remember, this was during the Cold War. Most young men in Sweden did military service, like their fathers and grandfathers had done. Sweden was a neutral country, squeezed between NATO in the west and the Warsaw Pact in the east. And to be trustworthy as a neutral country, we had to have strong armed forces. So in case of war, we could mobilize almost 750,000 people to defend ourselves. That's almost 10% of the population. And despite Sweden being on place 90 on the world population list, we had the fourth largest air force in the world during the peak of the Cold War. So military training was part of our community. So in this context, everybody understood the bigger picture. And for the majority of my conscripts, motivation was not an issue. And not to forget, the skills I learned in this particular lesson about the auto-injector could actually mean the difference between life and death. So for me and the other instructors, this high level of motivation meant that most of the time we had a learning situation like the flat red change curve, but without having to use change management to get there. And since general motivation wasn't a problem with my soldiers, what I actually did was to identify a motivational gap. I realized that the early morning might lead to tired soldiers and some lack of concentration. And to prevent that, I used some motivational tactics to close that gap and capture their attention. Do you remember which one I used? Surprise, yeah, I scared the shit out of them. No, the element of surprise, of course. Now, this was more than 35 years ago, and one of my first teaching experiences. So to be honest, I had no idea of how to work with motivational design. So actually, it was pure luck that my lesson happened to work out as well as it did. But when I look back now with my motivational glasses on, I can see why it was successful. From getting the bigger picture by placing the training in context of the Cold War, to using motivational tactics to boost attention, all the necessary elements were in place, so I couldn't possibly fail. Before I finish, I want to give you a few important things to remember. Change is constant. It was known already by the ancient Greeks that the one thing in life we can be sure of is that it won't be the same tomorrow, next week, or in the year 2525. And learning is change. Well, since learning is change and change is constant, learning designers like us will never run out of work. Happy times. It also means that we need to start looking at learning in context from a change perspective and not as isolated islands in a notion of opportunities. And finally, love your learners. If you love someone, you care about that person. And when you care about someone, you will do anything to make that person feel great. And that, my friends, is actually my main message today. To win the hearts and minds of your learners, you must first open up your own to fully understand your audience. Thank you for listening.
Do
Comments,
we have any
thoughts,
questions?
ideas, questions? Do you feel motivated? Get the mic.
Sometimes, even when we manage to go through the change curve and then we deal with the change management before the learning design starts, sometimes the system fails at the end of the journey. And then you need to embrace another wave of frustration. How do you deal with that as a learning specialist? Because you created the community, they support each other, they are curious, they are motivated. But then the system doesn't work. This is the biggest, maybe it's so difficult, sorry.
That's, I don't have an easy answer to that one.
Yeah.
I think the most important is to actually build the community. Because if you have a good community where people are covering their backs and help each other, mistakes and disasters are more easily handled.
Yeah.
So I think it's even more focus on building communities. I think that's an important thing too, because you can never fully protect yourself from faulty systems.
Exactly, exactly. And with systems, it always happen.
Yeah, it is.
I'm thinking about if you were to do the same teaching experience as you did in the 80s with the young soldiers, if you were to do it today with the way young people are, how would you do it?
I think the needle and water is a good start. Actually, I was as surprised as some soldiers when I fired. I hadn't tried it myself before, so I just did whoops. But I think a mix of media I think that's important. Much interactivity, mix sound files, video, and other elements. And I think might be me thinking about, but I think younger people are easily bored than we were. So you have to be faster, more MTV-like in the cuts, and more fast-paced. And maybe what's not as long trainings as there used to be. You can't get a teenager to focus on 45 minutes on front of a computer, maybe. So maybe several 5-minute lessons could be a better way to do it. But I think shorter sessions and more interactivity and mixed media, I would say. I will probably try that.
Do you see any special opportunities or what's the opposite hindrances within educational technology and the motivational factors that you've been talking about?
I think EdTech gives us much more possibilities because you have more, especially when you're talking online learning and not person-to-person learning, because you have all the possibilities to create gamification. You can trace people in a whole new way. You can customize training and how you deliver the content in different ways quite easily compared to what you could do previously. But still, many trainings today are just someone running a PowerPoint on screen and makes that a video.
But I agree, and I think the communication is a big part of educational technology that becomes easier, both towards the teacher or the knowledge repository, and also between the learners in a way. And I think it's also around the globe, basically. So it's exciting with the technology to enhance learning, I think.
Yeah. And online learnings today can be fully cooperative, and you can do group sessions around the globe, work together with people anywhere, basically. And that's very exciting, I think. You don't have to be in the same room anymore to work together. So that gives a lot of new possibilities. Oh.
Okay. In addition to your question, other than learning design, And do you have any special tactic for instance, millennials when it comes to communication strategy for learning design? Especially we are working more in LXPs, and it's a little bit tricky to like create communication strategies for LXP because it's self-paced and it has its own AI system at the back end.
No good answer to that one because I haven't been involved in age-specific trainings. Because if you create corporate trainings, you have normally the whole spectrum from young 20s to the elders that should take the same training. But I think that even older people could benefit from getting a more faster-paced trainings and shorter sessions as well. So many of these millennial tricks could be useful as well. So that if I had to choose, I will try to we would try to direct my training for the younger people, and then I think that the elder people will like it better as well.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I didn't fully understand one of the first curves, the one with the learning curve, the depression, and then the learning is either happening before or after. I didn't understand what was the vertical axis. It was morale and competence.
You could call it morale or competence, or you can call it efficiency or happiness or something like that. It's some measurement on how well the organization works or how well the individual works at a certain stage in the change process.
When the percentage stage, is it part of the learning phase, like we all go through a depressive moment when we are learning something, or is it for a specific
No, this is not
problem?
specific for learning. This is for actually for change. If something happens in your life that leads to a change. In my example, implement a new computer system. You work with the old one for 5 years and you know it very well, and then suddenly say you should use that, you should this one instead, and you don't understand anything and think it's only strange and hard to get grip of. So that's why you're getting this movement.
When there is a radical change.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's so not learning. You can have that as a learner as well if you're following a program and everything is fine with the first 2 courses at university. And then course number 3 is programming and some strange language and you can't understand, and then suddenly you dive down again until you get confident. So you can find this movement in many situations, but it's connected to change in somehow.
You're very lucky if you never notice.
A question from YouTube. Do you think this is taught enough in schools, or these techniques are used enough in schools towards kids? And how would we better that?
The first step, I think, is for people to be aware of motivational design, because we are experts in instruction design. We have numbers of models that we can create to find things with acronyms and so on. And the pedagogical aspect of the part, but just for motivational, people normally don't think of that. And I think most people I've seen that are actually doing this in the right way, either they are naturals or it's pure luck, like for me. They happen to do everything right. And I've very, very seldom seen it happen in a planned way, actually. And to just connect to that one, for myself, being a consultant and working with creating e-learnings for companies, I have never been able to do this to a customer because it takes too long time and it costs too much money. No. We have our PowerPoint. This is a template out, which makes me bleed in my heart. But even if you don't have time to actually follow the 3 questions in the templates, I think the important thing is to get the mindset that you have this in the back of your head, that think motivation at the same time you do the rest. Then you have very much in the right direction.
Just to connect to your question about making training available for
different cultures, different, people all around the world, and also different ages, but also different competence, the background of their knowledge.
Yeah.
And we cannot build for everyone. What is your recommendation for focus? Is it for as a beginner level or medium level or more high knowledgeable, high skills? Because you said that for young people, we should have them in mind.
If I could choose, I would like to create very modular trainings, small snippets or bit-sized training or whatever you call them, to be able to mix and match. And then maybe automatic or manual, be able to say, okay, this person has this background, you don't need these modules, but you need this one. And these other people needs this and this and this, so that you can actually pick pieces from different trainings. And
depending on pre-knowledge.
Yeah, that would be my preferred way to handle it. But cultures is always difficult. This would be what I think is funny here and humorous might be offensive in some other cultures. It's very difficult.
I liked your examples with the videos to kind of increase interest before a learning situation. And I'm curious about the other end as well. How can you repeat things, and how can you help people to continuously learn and maybe expand their learning on a particular topic? And I'm not thinking only about computer systems, but maybe ways of working together as teams, which we see the need for more and more in today's society. So the other end of the spectrum, how do we keep on repeating and increase learning maybe afterwards or continuously?
Absolutely. There are actually two main ways I would prefer. The one is actually, again, the human communities, online communities or live communities, meet people, talk with people, work together and learn from each other. That's very powerful, normally, if you have the possibility. And the other way around, if it's applicable, that always continue to build on the training. If you have a computer system or some skill you have, then just continue to add modules so that once you can actually expand your knowledge base and be better at what you're doing continuously.
How strong do you think that the context is when you start? I mean, how you make people feel. It's very, when you took the example with winter and the car that does not start, you immediately put, I mean, our how we feel about it in a certain way, and on the other hand, I mean, we get motivated to stay here because we get pizza afterwards.
That's the trick. I should put that in.
How strong is that factor, and do you have good examples on how to utilize it?
You mean that how many people doesn't reach the end of the curve?
No, yeah. I mean, how
drop off in a way.
The environment where you start doing it. If you're above or below.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Per definition, you're always above or on the status quo line when you start. But I think that's quite much dependent on the corporate culture as well. If you have a learning culture in the company, then it's much easier to actually adapt and get new things. If your company is not working that good, and if there are a lot of conflicts and so on, it's much harder, and then you probably lose people as well. So
those people should love the change even more, perhaps.
Maybe. Depends, yeah. If they manage to get through the whole process, they probably will do it. But the risk is that when everything is miserable, that people drop out. They get sick or they quit or try to find something else to do. So I think corporate culture is very important, that you foster that all the time, not only when you're implementing new systems, but always have a learning culture and a change culture. Make people used to it. Everything is changing all the time.
The first curve, the Kübler-Ross curve,
yeah.
It went up. Does it always, like, from depression, do the learners always recover, or are there instances when they just stay there, basically?
As you were into it, sometimes the system breaks or it doesn't work at all, and then you dive down again. So you can probably find any combinations of different curves, people going up and down, and right and left.
Okay,
and so
but how to recover from, like, let's say that the depression state from that curve is too long.
Yeah.
Too long for comfort or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
How can you push it upwards faster? Is it possible?
Probably, yeah. I'm not expert in change management, but there are people living from that. I guess they have methods and tricks to make this work as well. But communication, information, and training.
And I think your point was really the deal there, because if you have the community, if you are in touch with your audience, then probably at least you will allow them to show their frustration and you will connect. And then you can create a solution over that. But if you are not in contact, if you don't have the community, and then there is no chance to go upwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Because you can be frustrated, but if someone is listening to you and seems to take your problem seriously, then it will be much easier to get over it. Then you know you're not alone in this frustration. But if no one listens to you, just staying there screaming at the wall, then it's hard to recover, I think.
Any more questions? Thoughts, comments? Your own experiences?
When you were presenting the Core-Robler curve, you talk about time. You say this take time, and you, in the examples you were saying in the videos, this is coming, this will happen. But the change sometimes happens too fast.
Yep.
We don't have time to wait to communicate in a better way. The change just happened.
Yeah.
What to do that?
That's
because we start from the frustration,
Yeah.
because the change goes like this.
That's more like disaster recovery.
Yes,
it's another lecture, I think.
You don't have time to plan, to communicate.
No, it's hard, yeah. So, but it's absolutely it happens. We had a good example at Axis this spring, actually, because we had a major IT breach in, I think it was February. During a weekend, someone got into our systems and started to go around our servers and were preparing to plant disastrous code and steal things. And our IT manager found out from the logs or from someone calling him that something's happening. And I think he gave it a 3-second thought, is what he said, and then he pulled the plug to the internet. Just cut the internet for the whole Axis. And for all our customers as well, because many of our services are cloud services that are dependent on internet. But that was a quick decision, and it was a very quick change for us, because when we arrived Monday morning to work, we had no internet, no service, and not anything at all, basically, and we had to try to work anyway. So it can happen, absolutely. And it's hard to prepare, but some of these techniques you can use afterwards, but then you will be after what you had to be. But I think what you actually had to do is to follow the same process more or less, but force it to compromise it, to make it shorter and more effective. But it's more like disaster recovery.
Let's continue the discussion over food and drinks. Thank you here, and
Thank
thank you,
you.
Göran Bolinder, for talking to us.
Thank you.